My name is Cole. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to understand that by the time this night was over, I had made a decision that I have never told anyone the full reason for. People who know me know I quit the security job at Vantage Tower after one winter. They know I left a good-paying position without having anything else lined up. What they don't know is what happened on the last Friday night of February, and why, after that night, I could not make myself go back into that building. Vantage Tower is a 31-floor office building in downtown Seattle. Class A commercial space, the kind of address that attracts law firms and financial companies and tech consultancies. During the day, it runs about 2,000 people across all floors. At night, it runs 2 security guards, one for the lobby and lower floors, one for the upper floors. I had the upper floors. 17 through 31 every night, alone. The job itself was straightforward. 3 rounds per shift, each one taking about 40 minutes. Elevator up to 31. Walk the floor, stairwell down to 30, walk that floor, stairwell down to 29, and so on all the way to 17. Then elevator back to the security desk in the lobby. Log every floor, note any anomalies. On most nights, there were none. The building had a particular quality at night that took some getting used to. 31 floors of empty open-plan office space, lit only by the emergency strips along the floor and whatever ambient light came in through the windows from the city outside. Glass everywhere, reflections everywhere. The particular way that a large open floor full of desks and chairs and dark monitor screens creates shapes in low light that your brain keeps trying to resolve into people. You learn to stop looking at them too hard. You learn to let your peripheral vision go soft and just walk the path and check the exits and not engage with the shapes. Most nights, that worked fine. The night of the last Friday in February started like every other. I clocked in at 10, did my equipment check, exchanged about 4 sentences with the lobby guard whose name was Pete, and took the elevator to 31 to start my first round. 31 through 25 went fine. Empty floors, everything exactly as it should be. I was on 24, a floor occupied by a financial consulting firm, about halfway through the space when I saw the light. Not a reflection, not a monitor on standby, not the glow of a charging indicator. An actual light, white and directional, about 2/3 of the way across the floor near the window line. About the brightness of a phone screen, but steadier, not moving. I stopped walking. My first thought was what it always is when you see something unexpected on a dark floor at 2 in the morning. Someone had stayed late and fallen asleep at their desk. It happens. Someone grinds through until midnight, puts their head down for a minute, and the cleaning crew assumes they're a night owl. And the security guard on the previous shift misses them on rounds. I walked toward the light. When I was about 30 feet away, I could see it clearly. It was sitting on top of a desk near the window, a small battery-powered lantern, the camping kind, switched on and pointing upward at the ceiling. No bag nearby, no personal items, no sign that anyone had been sitting at that desk recently. The desk surface was clear and clean except for the lantern. Someone had placed it there deliberately. I stood there looking at it for a moment, and that was when I noticed the smell. Faint but unmistakable, the smell of cigarette smoke, recent smoke, the kind that still has warmth to it. On a non-smoking floor of a sealed office building at 2 in the morning. I keyed my radio and told Pete I had a possible unauthorized person on 24, that someone had left a light on, and there was a smell of recent smoke, and that I was going to do a sweep of floor. Pete said copy, told me to check in when I was done. What I did not tell Pete, because I did not fully understand it yet, was the other thing I had noticed. The light from the lantern was bright enough to cast shadows, and in the shadow it threw across the floor beside the desk, the shadow of the desk and the lantern and the chair, there was one shadow that didn't belong. Roughly person-shaped, extending out from the side of the desk in the wrong direction to be cast by the lantern. Absolutely still. I kept my eyes on it as I reached for my radio and I said, in a voice that I worked very hard to keep at the same volume and cadence as every other radio call I had made that night, that I was doing a sweep of floor 24 and would check in when complete. Then I walked away from the desk. Not fast, not slow. The same pace I always walked, heel to toe, steady and quiet, the way you move when you don't want to announce yourself. Because here's what I understood in that moment, in a way that bypassed thinking entirely and landed somewhere older and deeper. I did not want it to know that I had seen it. I don't know how I knew that. I don't know what instinct fired or why. But the certainty was absolute. If it knew I had seen it, something would change. Something about the situation would become different and worse, in a way I could not articulate but understood completely. The only thing I had, the only possible advantage in that space at that moment was that I had seen it and it did not know I had seen it. So I walked to the far end of the floor, checked the stairwell door the way I always did, and went through into the stairwell. The moment the door closed behind me, I moved. Down the stairs. 17, not the elevator, because the elevator opened back onto the lobby, and I needed to think before I was back in front of Pete with his questions I did not have answers to. I went down one floor to 23, and I stood in the stairwell with my back against the wall, and I breathed. Here is what I was thinking. Someone had gotten into the building, gotten to floor 24, and was crouching beside a desk in the dark. A person, a human person, hiding in an office building in the middle of the night. That was the rational explanation, and I held on to it the way you hold on to a rope over water. But the shadow had not been in a crouching position. It had been standing, and it had been absolutely, completely, profoundly still in a way that I cannot explain and cannot describe, except to say that nothing I have ever seen a living person do has matched it. Living people, even when they are trying to be very still, are not still in that way. There is always something, a breath that moves the chest, a microshift of weight, the body's constant small negotiations with gravity that we don't control and can't stop. There was none of that. Whatever was standing beside that desk was still in the way that things are still when stillness is not an effort, when it's just the default state. I called Pete on the radio from the stairwell. I told him the sweep was clear, no one found, probably a lantern left by a late worker. I'd bag it and bring it down at the end of the round. He said copy, normal. Then I stood in that stairwell for a while longer, and I thought about what I was going to do. What I did was go back to floor 24. I know how that sounds. I'm not sure I can explain it except to say that there was a part of me that needed to know, that couldn't leave it unresolved, and a part of me that understood that whatever was up there, if it was still there, still didn't know I had seen it. That was still true. I still had that. I came back through the stairwell door on the far side of the floor from where I had been before. The opposite end from the desk with the lantern. The floor was large enough that the lantern's light was just a glow from that distance, diffuse, not enough to see details. I moved along the window side, staying close to the glass, stepping carefully. I got to within about 60 feet of the desk. The lantern was still on. The shadow beside the desk was gone. The chair that had been tucked under the desk was now pulled out, sitting at an angle, facing slightly toward the direction I had come from the first time, the direction I had walked away from. Something had moved the chair. Something had watched me leave. I walked out of that building at the end of my shift at 6 in the morning, and I did not run, because I had made it through the remaining 4 hours by doing the only thing that felt survivable. I finished my rounds, I logged every floor, I said goodnight to Pete, and I did not go back to floor 24. On Monday, I gave 2 weeks' notice. I have not been back to Vantage Tower since that night, not for any reason. I have walked past it twice, and both times I looked up at the dark windows on the upper floors and thought about what it is to stand in a large silent space and watch someone walk away from you and know they don't know you're there. It's a specific feeling. I know, because I felt it standing in the stairwell. The difference is that I was afraid. I don't think it was. My name is Daniel, and I did security work for 11 years before the job at Harwick Regional. Warehouses, office parks. One stretch at a county courthouse that nearly put me to sleep permanently. So when I tell you I'm not the kind of man who startles easily or reads too much into things, I'm telling you that from a place of actual experience. 11 years of quiet nights has a way of calibrating you. You learn the difference between a building settling and something that isn't. What happened at Harwick, I have never fully explained to anyone. Partly because the people I tried to tell looked at me the way people look at you when they've already decided how the story ends. And partly because the full version of it, the part that keeps me up, isn't something that photographs well in the retelling. It's something you have to be inside to understand. But I'll try. Harwick Regional is a mid-sized community hospital in western Pennsylvania, about 40 minutes outside Pittsburgh. 4 floors, 2 wings, a separate oncology building connected by a covered walkway. Night security ran 2 guards on rotation, one staying near the ER entrance and the main desk, one doing building rounds. On most nights, I was the one doing rounds. The rounds covered both wings, both stairwells, the basement supply area, the walkway to oncology, and then the oncology building itself. Start time was 10 p.m., and I'd do 4 full circuits before dawn, the last one ending around 5:30. 40 minutes per circuit, give or take. I knew that building the way you know a route you've walked hundreds of times. Every sound it made, every light that flickered, every door that needed a firm pull to close properly. The east wing on the 3rd floor was long-term care. Patients who weren't going home anytime soon, or weren't going home at all, mostly elderly, some terminal. At night, that hallway had a particular quality to it. a kind of dense, pressurized quiet that felt different from the rest of the building. The nurses' station at the end of the hall was staffed overnight, but it was staffed by one person, and that one person was usually doing paperwork with headphones in by the time my first round came through. Room 9 on the east wing, 3rd floor, was at the far end of the hall, last door before the fire exit. In my first 3 months at Harwick, it had been occupied by a series of patients, none of whom stayed longer than a few weeks. I didn't know their names. That was not my job. My job was to check that the door was properly latched on rounds, look through the narrow window panel, and move on, which is what I did, every circuit, for 3 months. Then in early November, room 9 was empty, not between patients empty either. I asked about it once, casually, and one of the night nurses told me it had been taken out of rotation for a plumbing issue. A leak in the wall, she said. Maintenance had been through and it was being monitored, probably back in service within a couple weeks. The door stayed shut, the light inside stayed off. Nothing to note, nothing to check. On my rounds I would pass it, glance at the closed door, and keep walking. That lasted about 10 days. On the 11th night, near the end of my second circuit, I passed room 9 and the door was open. Not wide open. 4 or 5 inches, enough that the edge of it had drifted past the frame. The room inside was dark. I stopped. I checked the time, just past 1 in the morning. I knocked on the door frame, announced myself the way you do, and pushed the door the rest of the way open. Empty room. Stripped bed, bare mattress. The particular blankness of a space that's been cleared out. The plumbing issue had apparently involved some drywall work. There was a patched section on the far wall about 2 feet square, still unpainted. The window shade was down. A folding chair sat in the corner for some reason, open, facing the bed. Nothing out of place. I pulled the door shut until the latch clicked, made a note in my log. Door found ajar, room vacant, secured, and continued my round. 2 nights later, same thing. Door ajar, same few inches. Same empty room. I reported it to my supervisor, a guy named Walt who had been doing hospital security since before I was born, and who treated almost everything with the same low-grade skepticism. He said it was probably the latch mechanism, that old hospital doors had a tendency to drift if the latch wasn't engaging cleanly, and that maintenance would look at it. I said fine. The door continued to drift open every couple of nights. Maintenance looked at it, said there was nothing wrong with the latch, and adjusted the door frame slightly. It stopped for about a week. Then it started again. I want to be clear that up to this point, I had no particular feeling about room 9. A door with a faulty latch in an empty room in a hospital at 2 in the morning is not inherently unsettling. It's a maintenance issue. I had logged it, reported it, watched it get addressed, and watched it persist. That was the extent of it. The feeling started on a Wednesday in late November, about 5 weeks into the door issue. I was coming down the east wing on my 3rd circuit, around 2:30 in the morning. The hallway was dim, the way it always was at that hour, the overhead lights on their nighttime setting, yellow and low. The nurse's station at the far end had its desk lamp on, everything normal. Except room 9's door was open again, and this time the light inside was on. Not the overhead, just the small reading light mounted above the bed, the kind with the bendable neck. It was on, angled toward the bed, and in its light I could see that there was a person in the bed. I stopped walking. Patient in an out-of-service room, light on at 2:30 in the morning, no staff visible. That was not a normal situation. I keyed my radio, told Walt I had a situation on 3 East, and walked toward the room. I knocked on the open door, no response. I pushed it wider and stepped in. The patient was an elderly man. Thin, white-haired, lying on his back with the blanket pulled to his chest and his hands folded over it. Eyes closed. He looked comfortable. He looked like he was simply sleeping. I said, "Excuse me," loudly enough to wake a light sleeper. He didn't move. I said it again. Nothing. I keyed the radio and told Walt I had an unresponsive patient in room 9 on 3 East, that I was not sure how he'd gotten there, and that I needed nursing staff immediately. Then I stepped closer to the bed to check for breathing. That was when I noticed the chart. There was a chart hanging on the hook at the foot of the bed, the kind on a clipboard, the kind that should only be there if a patient had been formally admitted to that room. I picked it up. The name at the top was Thomas R. Calloway. The admission date was November the 3rd. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks, during which I had passed this room on 12 separate rounds, looked through the window panel, and seen nothing. During which the room had been listed as out of service. During which I had pushed open this same door on 4 separate occasions, entered this same room, and found it empty. The attending nurse arrived 40 seconds after my second radio call. She came through the door, took one look at the man in the bed, and her face did something I have thought about many times since. It didn't go pale. It didn't go frightened. It went carefully, deliberately neutral. The way a face goes when the person wearing it is making a decision about what to show. She checked his pulse, checked his breathing, wrote something on a small notepad she pulled from her pocket. Then she looked at me. She asked how I had found him. I told her the door was open and the light was on. She wrote that down too. Then she said, in a tone that was somehow both gentle and final, that Miss Calloway had been in this room for 3 weeks, that he was in the late stages of a condition she named, but that I didn't retain, and that he was comfortable and not in distress. She thanked me for checking in. She said she would note it in her report. She did not explain why the room had been listed as out of service. She did not explain why I had found it empty on 4 previous entries. She did not explain the chart, or the admission date, or any of it. And here is what I have never been able to make add up in the 1.5 years since that night. I went back through my logs. Every entry for room 9 over the previous 5 weeks. Door found ajar, room vacant secured. Door ajar, room vacant secured. 4 times I had walked into that room and logged it as empty. 3 weeks into a documented admission. I quit Harwick Regional in December. I told Walt it was personal reasons, which was technically true. What I know is this: Thomas R. Calloway was a real patient. He was real, he was there, he had a chart with his name and an admission date going back 3 weeks. He was in that bed every time I passed that room. He had to have been, but I walked into that room 4 times. And 4 times I wrote down that it was empty. I don't know which part of that is the thing that should scare me most. And I'm not sure I want to. My name is Ray, and I want to start with one thing so you understand the rest of this correctly. I am not a man who gets rattled. 32 years old, 6 years doing overnight security across 4 different facilities. And in all that time, the most scared I ever got was the night a raccoon got into the HVAC system at a logistics warehouse in Tacoma, and I thought someone was trying to get through the ceiling. That's the kind of scared I was capable of. Small, manageable, the kind with an explanation at the end. What happened at Kellner Cold Storage does not have an explanation at the end. I've spent 14 months looking for one, and the closest I've gotten is a gap in the story where the explanation should be. That gap is what I'm going to tell you about. Kellner is a commercial cold storage facility about 20 miles outside Spokane, Washington. If you've never been in one of those, picture a warehouse the size of a city block, divided into refrigerated sections that range from cool to deep freeze, depending on what's being stored. The company ran 3 shifts, but overnight there was no active staff, just 2 security guards covering the building and the surrounding yard. My partner on that shift was a guy named Brent, who covered the exterior and the loading dock area while I handled the interior. The interior of Kellner at night is one of the stranger environments I've worked in. Cold, obviously. Cold enough that you wore a second jacket on your rounds even in summer. The refrigeration units ran constantly. A low mechanical drone that filled every room and hallway and never changed pitch. The lighting was industrial, fluorescent tubes mounted high up on the ceiling, and in the coldest sections, some of them flickered or buzzed due to the temperature. It was the kind of place that felt indifferent to you. Not hostile, just completely, absolutely indifferent, the way a glacier is indifferent. You were there and that was fine, and the facility did not care about you in any direction. I want you to hold that feeling in mind. That sense of a place that doesn't notice you. Because the thing that happened started with the feeling that it did. 6 weeks into the job, January, deep into a Washington winter. My round started at 10 p.m. and I did 6 circuits through the night, each one taking about 35 minutes. I knew the layout by that point the way I knew my own apartment. Every turn automatic, every sound cataloged. The middle section of the facility, what the day staff called the bridge, was a long connecting corridor between the 2 main refrigerated warehouses. Concrete floor, concrete walls, the drone of the refrigeration units on both sides, coming through the walls in a way that made it hard to localize sound. At the far end of the bridge was a secondary exit, a heavy steel door that led to the north yard. It was kept locked from the outside and required a key card from the inside. My key card. Mine and Brent's and the facility manager's. On the night of January the 14th, on my 3rd circuit, I walked into the bridge and stopped. There was a smell. Not a cold storage smell. Not the clean, sealed, slightly chemical smell that the facility always had. Something organic, warm. The kind of smell that registers in a place that cold is profoundly wrong, the way a lit match registers in a dark room. It was the smell of a person. Body heat and breath, concentrated and close, in a corridor that was empty as far as I could see in either direction. I stood still and I listened. Nothing. Just the drone. I walked the full length of the bridge, checked the door at the far end. Locked, secure. Walked back. The smell faded as I moved away from where I had been standing, which meant it had a point of origin. I stood in that spot again and turned slowly, trying to locate where it was coming from. It was coming from above me. The bridge had a utility space above the ceiling, accessible through a hatch about 2/3 of the way along. Storage for maintenance equipment, duct access, that kind of thing. The hatch was a standard ceiling panel, the kind with a pull-tab latch. The pull-tab latch was extended. Not opened, but extended. The way it looks when someone has reached up and pulled it, and then let it fall back without fully releasing. I stared at that latch for a long time. Then I got on the radio and called Brent. Told him I had a possible situation in the bridge, that I thought there might be someone in the utility space above the ceiling, and that I needed him inside. He said he was on his way. While I waited, I did not stand directly below the hatch. I want to be honest about that. I moved to the side and kept my eyes on it, and during the 4 minutes it took Brent to come through from the exterior, I did not look away from it once. Nothing moved, nothing came down. The smell was still there. When Brent arrived, we agreed he would boost me up. I unlatched the hatch, pushed it up, and put my head through. The utility space was about 3 feet of clearance between the ceiling and the roof structure. Insulation on the floor, bundled cables running along one side, a stack of maintenance equipment pushed against the far wall. Maybe 8 feet wide, 30 feet long, lit dimly by a single work light on a cord. Empty, except for one thing. On the insulation, maybe 6 feet from the hatch, there were footprints. Not old prints, not compressed into the insulation the way prints get when they've been there a long time. Fresh ones. The insulation was still recovering around the edges, the way it does when something has recently been standing on it, and then moved off. The prints led from somewhere in the middle of the space toward the hatch, toward where I was, and then they stopped, about 2 feet short of the hatch, as though whatever had made them had simply ceased to be there. I dropped back down. I told Brent what I'd seen. We did a full walk of the exterior together, checked every door and gate, reviewed the entry logs on the keycard system. No entries after the facility manager had locked up at 8:30 that evening. No exits either. We filed a report. The facility manager came in the next morning, went up through the hatch himself, and told us the prints were probably from a maintenance worker who'd been up there recently. We asked when. He said he'd have to check the maintenance schedule. We never heard back about it. I want to tell you about the rest of that night, because this is the part that I think about the most. After Brent went back outside and I continued my rounds, I had 3 more circuits to complete before the end of shift. The 4th and 5th were fine, quiet, uneventful in every way. On the 6th and final circuit, walking the bridge again at around 4:30 in the morning, I had the distinct and specific sensation that something was walking behind me. Not a sound, not a footstep, just a sensation. The particular awareness of proximity that human beings have developed over a very long time for very good reasons, going off steadily and clearly at the back of my neck. I turned around. The bridge was empty. I turned back and kept walking, because what else do you do? And the sensation came back immediately. Same proximity, same certainty. Close enough that if I had reached back, I would have touched something. I have worked alone in empty buildings at night for 6 years. I know what that environment feels like. I know the difference between the ambient unease of a large, empty space and the specific, targeted feeling of being followed. That night in the bridge, at 4:30 in the morning, something was behind me. I do not know what it was or how it was possible for something to be behind me in an empty corridor, but it was there, and it knew I was there, and it was close enough that I could hear, just barely, just at the edge of audible, the sound of breath that was not mine. I walked the rest of that corridor, at a pace I will not describe as walking. I went through the door into the main warehouse, let it close behind me, and stood with my back against it for a full minute. Then I finished my shift, because it was 45 minutes to sunrise and I needed the job. I gave notice the following week, told them a family situation had come up, which was not true. The real reason was simpler than that. 6 years of empty buildings at night, and that was the first time I ever understood, on a level below thinking, that there are places where you are not the only one doing rounds. You are just the only one they can see.